All right. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the Pre-connectathon 2021. Run up to the FHIR connectathon that's there from 10th of December till 12th of December. So this is our second meeting. Our first kickoff happened yesterday, and I have shared the presentation from yesterday's meeting with all the participants. If somebody has not received, please ping on Zulip and you should be getting that. Also, there was a recording that was shared. So if somebody wants to take a look at it, please take a look at the recording also. So today's session is more about the tracks and the track leads. So it will be the individual tracks, the respective tracks and the track leads will be presenting what they plan about their tracks, how they want to use the pre-connectathon, and what are the next steps for the participants if they are interested in that particular track. So that's the objective of this particular session. Okay, and we get started with a keynote address from Kiran. Kiran, just a minute. Kiran is actually a technology advisor at National Health Authority. He's a so how we see in the FHIR India community him as he's a community person, and he is actually a liaison between the FHIR India community and the various community and the government initiatives, the NHA, right? So he has been very helpful in that regards. So today he has agreed to share with us his insights on Abdm. So most of you would be aware of what Abdm is, and even if you are not aware, so Kiran's talk will actually set the stage of what's the digital health transformation the country is looking at, and how the standards, FHIR, terminologies, etc., will play a role. So that's the first talk that we will have with Kiran, and followed by after that we will have the track updates from respective track leads. Okay, and just keep a watch on 29 days to go. So 29 days to make as much as so make most of it, the 29 days that is available. All right. So while Kiran joins, I can also share with you. So it's only 2 minutes remaining, so I think we should wait for Kiran to join, and then we can get started. Or this is what we can do. If one of the tracks are ready, maybe Aditya, if you're ready. Aditya, if you're ready, you can go ahead first.
Yeah, sure.
And then after that, we can, when Kiran joins in, we can have his talk.
Yeah,
right?
definitely. Yeah, I can do that.
So I'll stop sharing, and please share the screen. You should be able to share the screen.
Okay, let me do that. Let me start sharing my screen. Okay, is it visible for everyone?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So a quick update. Basically, that's the agenda for today. That each of the track has to roll out at least some tentative plan, what we are thinking, how we can utilize this pre-connectathon period. As this is a starter track, most of the things we are going to is understand, learn, do hands-on things. Most of the stuff will happen during the connectathon itself, but still I'll plan out some sessions, some activities during our pre-connectathon period, which will prepare you better for the actual connectathon event. Okay, so this is the plan that we will have first meetup. So whomsoever is interested in FHIR starter track, we will have a meetup on Wednesday next week around 8 p.m. IST. I'll share you the meeting link later on. So if you think that the starter track is good for you, please come and join. And this will be like more of an informal meet where You can tell me what are your expectations. I can tell you about the track, how we are going to go about this track, what we are going to understand, and other things. Okay. So this is more of going to be informal. Even you can ask your doubts, questions, or you can share your thoughts. And then we will have a couple of sessions, and it can even go more. We will see how we span out this. Once we start with very first session, we will see how we go about the next of them. But yeah, roughly 2 sessions of each 1.5 hour, and or maybe we can think of 3 sessions of 3 hours. Again, timings we will decide in this meetup. So because for whatever the time which is suitable for most of the participants, we can fix those timings. Okay. So these sessions are going to be really helpful because they will build the base for the actual connectathon activities. Because during connectathon, there will be less sessions and it will be more of trying out things to understand how FHIR is solving the interoperability space. Okay. So the tentative timings is 8 p.m., but the dates I have finalized as 24th November and 1st December. So every week we will have one session kind of thing. And then we'll have one more session just before the day of connectathon. So again, this we might even think of doing 8th or mostly 9th. We will see which day, but yeah, at least 1 or 2 days prior only. There we will recap whatever we have understood in previous sessions quickly, so that whomsoever has joined newly, they are on the same page before we jump to the actual connectathon things on 10th of December. And we will also talk about more concretely on connectathon activities. So that's the pre-connectathon plan. And as I said, this is almost what we will mostly follow, but this can change depending on your thoughts, your suggestions, what we will do on November 17th. Any questions? If not, then I can stop sharing the screen. Yeah.
So a couple of questions or clarifications.
Yeah.
Aditya, one is like, and you may have repeated it yesterday. Who are the intended audience for this track? Who would benefit the most?
People who are starting their journey with FHIR. So if you think that you have heard about FHIR and you know a very high level thing that yes, we know it's some HL7 standard and we use it to exchange data, some format, but that's it. You are not aware really about the technicalities. At least the fundamentals are not there. Like what is resource, how it looks like, what is when we say FHIR API is solving the problem, how that API looks like. That is what you are gonna see in see through practical hands-on exercises. Basically, we will try to solve some use cases, and that will tell you that how to use FHIR. So anyone starting with FHIR, if you are already working on FHIR and you have some basic idea about FHIR, or maybe on technical side you are working on coding and programming, but you really never get a chance to see FHIR properly, the resource part and the API part, then this track is going to be very helpful for you. So, and then your designation doesn't matter. You can be technical, non-technical, domain, clinical person, anyone who wants to start their journey with FHIR and they want to really understand how FHIR is solving problem. And 2 things we will focus a lot, that is the resource itself, that's the core part of FHIR, and the API. These are the 2 fundamental things you are going to understand properly in this track.
Thanks, Aditya. So do participate in the FHIR start track if you are starting up with FHIR. So thanks, Aditya. And I see Kiran has joined. So welcome, Kiran. So while you were coming, Kiran, so we were just going through our regular track agenda, and we were talking about what are the different tracks, what to expect in the run-up to the connectathon, and how do the track leads actually prepare the participants so that on the connectathon day, everyone is on the same page and we can actually achieve something, right? So that's the agenda of the connectathon. So over to you, Kiran. And Kiran, as I already explained to all of you, Kiran is our, how we see him is as a community liaison between us and the government. And he is actually the technology advisor to the NHA. He's a co-founder and CEO of Registry Foundation. And he is a core volunteer at iSpirit as well. So
thanks for that intro, Kumar. Hello, everyone. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take about 15, maybe 20 minutes. And my idea is to provide a brief intro to what's the Aishman Bharath digital mission. You know, many of the things you guys folks are doing at the Connectathon. There is a larger shift in the Indian ecosystem that's actually coming, and I would like to kind of provide a sneak preview kind of a thing from my perspective of what's coming, what's going to change. Let me see if I can share my screen so that you folks can all see this. Please confirm, you know, when my slide showing. So what we're going to do is like use this 15-20 minutes that I have to try to kind of help you folks understand what is the Aishman Bharath digital mission about. And many of you might know this, but fundamentally it was launched as a pilot actually first right in the middle of the pandemic by the PM on August 15, 2020, but it was only in very select duties. So there is not much noise or action that might have been visible wherever you are. And it's being implemented by the National Health Authority, where I act as an advisor IT. And the idea is to create what we call as digital building blocks. So the question is, what are digital building blocks? How will they make a difference to India? And quite recently, the Prime Minister actually allowed for this program to go nationally. And so we are hoping that it will start impacting many of your software systems and many provide a lot of new opportunity to young startups in the ecosystem to build and bring many interesting solutions into this particular space. Kumar is saying that my voice is breaking. Let me see if I can take a minute to change my network.
It's good for me, Kiran. Only thing
it's actually pretty clear.
It's okay?
Yeah, it's good actually.
Yeah. All right. So maybe what I can do is just to reduce my bandwidth, I'll turn my video off. And I hope that will provide it. So that's fine. So let me just continue. So one of the things about the mission is that it has got many guiding principles, but two things are quite important. One is the fact that it's actually voluntary participation. So that means that most elements of the Aishman Bharath digital mission are voluntary, which is things like getting a health ID or actually sharing health records. But we hope that there are going to be very strong use cases and most people will actually find value and therefore will voluntarily participate. And the second thing is it's designed to make sure that health data from a privacy perspective, and more importantly, which I'll talk about in a minute, alignment with upcoming laws are actually built into the design. Of course, there are quite a few other things from inclusivity to making sure that India shifts from its curative focus to a wellness-centric focus. That's also part of the overall plan. But before we go there, it'll be good for us to just generally understand what is health data privacy or data privacy laws and how it's going. And many of you might have heard about what's called the Personal Data Protection Bill, which is currently in Parliament. But you may not have actually understood what are the implications for your own business or for your own software that is coming. But clearly, when PDP is passed, India will enter an era where there is going to be a significant impact on how data, which has any personal information, is viewed, and that includes health data, because health data also has personal information. So this bill regulates anything that you do with data in terms of how do you store it, how do you collect it, what is the purpose that you are processing it, and so on. And it has two constructs. It has a construct of a data principle. So in the health context, that is the patient. And it has a construct called a data fiduciary. In the health context, it is any entity that is holding the health data. So usually a healthcare provider becomes a data fiduciary. And instead of saying who owns the data, the bill simply talks about if you are holding data that contains personal information of an individual, what rights do you as a data fiduciary need to offer to the data principal on their data? So that's really how the whole bill is structured. So there's a bunch of rights that everybody has to offer for any data, personal data that they would be holding on an individual, including health records. Now, to be able to do all of these rights, there is a concept called an electronic consent manager. So later on in this session that I'm going to talk about, I'll talk about how in the Aishman Bharath digital mission, we have introduced the concept of a health information exchange and consent manager, which plays this role even as visualized in the bill of the consent manager. And fundamentally think about it as the consent manager is the entity that knows what rights you have provided on your data to various entities. And it also visualizes a construct called a data protection authority, which would oversee this ecosystem. The bill is of course public. All of you can go read it, and it may be very interesting for people who are interested in how data privacy is emerging. But let's get very quickly into what is the Aishman Bharat digital mission doing with health data. Now, as you all know, and this session is a connectathon which actually deals with health data and FHIR and so on. We all know that the healthcare is already going digital. In fact, many of you would have probably got recently a test done, probably a COVID test or an RT-PCR done in the recent past, and you would have seen that you are able to go to that lab's website and actually get that as a PDF report by probably putting a code on a website. So here's a classic example of a healthcare provider digitally sharing a healthcare data with their patient. Now, why we think that the current model is the wrong architecture is because two things did not happen. One, that report became a one-time transaction. It did not really get added into a longitudinal health record. So we are not using this opportunity to really create an organized longitudinal health record. And two, the report format is not standardized. So everybody is creating their own PDF. So I call that as human readable, but not machine readable and machine interpretable, right? Which makes it very hard to do some very interesting use cases that I hope many of you will trial and do with Connectathon if you could get machine readable data. So this is what's the mission's one of the key purposes is. So what it says is, hey, Mr. Healthcare Provider, if you are providing a physical printout, that means you digitally create the data anyway in the first place. Can you start by linking that health record with a patient's health ID? And we'll talk a bit about what's the health ID and help the patient create a longitudinal health record. And two, don't share just a PDF. While we are okay for you to start by sharing a PDF, can you migrate this to a standardized FHIR format? And I'll talk about what are the various formats that we have standardized so that the report can actually be easily interpretable by software systems. And that's really what the Aishman Bharat digital mission is about. Now, in terms of what kind of health records we have standardized, we have only standardized a few types. So it's not that you can exchange any type of data on this infrastructure. So we have said, hey, there are diagnostic reports. And if this is a diagnostic report you're sharing, here is the FHIR standard for that. And you can look at all of that. And probably I'll just take it to the site. And Kumar, can you tell me if you guys have shown the NRCES site for the Connectathon players at this point?
Not yet. After this, that presentation will be there.
Great. Okay. So essentially what we have done is we have taken 5 or 6 types of, only 6 types of reports. So we have a diagnostic report. So both image reports, we have given a standard. For pathology lab reports, we have given a standard. And many of you may also know that you can go one layer deeper. So for example, when we are dealing with a lab report, essentially for each test, you can use a code, which is typically called a LOINC code, to say, okay, what was the type of test, so that everybody represents, say, a random blood sugar test using the same kind of a code, so that you can actually draw a graph, for example, of how was my sugar over time, if you wanted it, right? So that's really what we mean when we say to build this into a standard. Similarly, we have done a standard for discharge summaries and for OP consultation notes, for medical prescriptions. And in fact, we are working, and there is, unfortunately, it's not yet out at this point, but we are actively working to create something called a drug registry and a bunch of drug codes that can be used for every medication that is sold in India, as well as, of course, immunization records, including, for example, the recent COVID immunization records that are in place. So these are the types of health data that can be shared with patients. And for all of these, there are FHIR formats that are available. And a bit later in this presentation, or right after this presentation, I'll also show you where they are published so that you can actually go look at some of these document standards. Now, let's get a bit more into the architecture, understand what's a health ID. So a health ID is basically, if you were someone in this ecosystem who wanted to get their health information digitally, then is when we expect you to go get a health ID. In many cases, it's likely that you will probably start with a mobile application that we call a PHR app, and that PHR app will actually help you create the health ID. Very similar to in UPI. All of you, if you're using a Google Pay, Phone Pay, under the hood, you probably know that there is something called an UPI ID, which is the primary ID. So very similarly, likely that some front end will help you create your health ID, but it's all it takes is a name, date of birth, gender, or a mobile number, or you can also do it with your Aadhaar. And there is something in this whole architecture that we call as a PHR address. It's actually an address with your consent manager, which isn't easy to remember because the health ID is a 14-digit number, versus the PHR address is a easy to remember user chosen entity. And the whole design, like I said, because it's voluntary, it means you can get yourself a health ID and tomorrow decide I don't want it. So you can actually opt out of the ecosystem. So there are two ways you can get it today. You can get it going to healthid.ndhm.gov.in, by the way the URL is also changed. You can also go to healthid.abdm.gov.in. And in some of the facilities that have already started to participate in the ABDM infrastructure, you can actually get it at the hospital when you visit a hospital, but mostly those services are designed for people who don't have phones, or for elderly or illiterate who can't actually do it from a self perspective. Now let's understand a bit about how this health ID works. But one of the key use cases that we have is how in UPI today, you go to a shop, you don't think, you pull out your phone, you just scan the code and you make a payment. Very similarly, tomorrow when you go to a healthcare facility, at the registration counter, you'll find one small little QR code pasted. You're going to pull out your app, use your PHR application to just scan the code, and instantly you will be able to register with that health facility. But that registration essentially involves you sharing your health ID with health facility, giving automated consent which says, hey, you can share any health records you create and link them to this health ID. So that's how we see it. Of course, you can also do it by showing your QR code and the hospital can scan it, or the patient can say it verbally and you can also still register. So we think this will lead to some benefits, including error-free capture or a rapid registration from a health ID perspective. Now, as we all know, any hospital or lab uses typically a software in which they create health records. We call this HMIS software, LIMS software, EMR software that is used at this health facility. And the way the architecture works is that we expect that these records will be held typically either on-premise or in the cloud for a reasonably long term. And long term currently we are being defined from a policy perspective to likely to be about 10 years. Now, what we want is that this software would be changed so that when a health ID is introduced into that system, it will say, hey, I have a health record linked against health ID, and it puts a link on this using the HIECM. So HIECM is a building block, just like health ID is a building block in our architecture. HIECM is another building block where you essentially put the link which says, I am holding a health record. So if you were to look at a PHR address and a health ID, what you will see is a bunch of links. So you will say, okay, there is some health records at Diagnostic Center X, Hospital Y, Clinic Z. And this is what we mean by a federated architecture. That means there is no single place where your health records are held, but it's actually held in the facilities that created these kind of health records in the architecture. So what this also means is that the software that a hospital or a diagnostic center needs to use to participate in ABDM needs to have integrated with our APIs, and therefore it needs to have become ABDM compliant, is the phrase that we use. Now, the architecture also allows for sharing your health records with consent. What that means is that new hospital that you have gone to, when you share your health ID, you can say, okay, I can see that you have certain health records linked against your health ID. Can I get access to those health records? To make that request for, can I get access to your health records, that facility needs to do something called a consent request in the architecture. So they will send consent request. So the consent request says, what is the reason why they want access to your data? It's called a purpose. What data do they want? Do they want all the data you have, or a subset of the data that you have? How long do they plan to keep that data, right? So that's called a consent request. So you as a patient on your PHR app, you will be able to say, okay, I don't think I want to give access to all of this data. I think I want them to keep it for only this amount of time and so on. So you can change what you consent to, including, and then once you say okay, then the architecture essentially allows that new hospital to be able to pull a copy of all your health records and then use it for the purpose for which you provided the consent. So most commonly, it will use it to show it to your treating doctor so that your doctor can use your historical information to make better judgments for you. So that's our high-level architecture within NDHM. So you have anybody which is a hospital or a diagnostic center or a clinic that's participating and decides to share health records in the NDHM ecosystem is called a health information provider. All of the software holding these health records are called health repository providers. But whenever they share any health record, they share it using a standard that we spoke about, which is called the FHIR NDHM profiles. And you can see now how these digital building blocks called health ID, health information exchange and consent manager, and the registries, which I'll talk about in a minute, actually make this construct of ability for you to link data, share data, or get data and fetch data with consents in the ecosystem. So any entity that wants to access your information is typically called a health information user in the architecture. So even the mobile app, the PHR app that I'm talking about, is a health information user. So even for it to be able to get access to your data, it also needs to take a consent from you, and only then can it actually get your data and show your data or display your data to you. Now, overall, if you have a high level view of the architecture, you can understand that a whole variety of entities, you're expecting many PHR apps, many hospital labs and software to integrate with NDHM and essentially operate in this particular format. Now, can anybody link a health data against our health ID or PHR address? The answer is no. We only expect registered hospitals. So any hospital that's considered a valid hospital first needs to be in the health facility registry you see as a building blocks on this diagram. Only then they can get access to linking any health record. So that's how we make sure that only trusted entities, can participate in this ecosystem, and there can be a bunch of policies and APIs and controls for us to be able to do this. So I'm going to stop today's presentation specifically on this topic at this point. Let me focus a bit on how people actually participate. So a couple of other things that I will just quickly run through. This is an important slide. Everything I've spoken about right now is about how NDHM is enabling the flow of what we call as personalized health information. And connecting back to our first slide, this is an architecture that's fully aligned with the PDP bill. So if the PDP bill were to come out tomorrow and there was a hospital that was using NDHM compliant software, they would automatically more or less be compliant to the PDP bill. But NDHM not only enables these personal data flows, but we are also working on two other data flows, one called an aggregated dataset flow and an anonymized dataset flow, which will also be enabled by pretty much the same architecture in this. So I don't take other use cases for this session. I'm going to focus a bit about how we are actually doing this. So this is the overall architecture of the Aishman Bharath Digital Mission. And what I've really covered is the bottom layer and just two boxes of the bottom layer, what we call as the health data exchange layer, which is about health records and electronic registries. But Aishman Bharath is also working on how to redefine how health insurance claims are processed in India, and also how digital health services from telemedicines and other kind of services would also be defined in India. There are consultation papers available on the Abdm website if you're interested in any of the other topics that you can actually look at. Now, it keeps changing back to a different slide set. I don't know why, but let's go back. Yes. We have, of course, a construct that we call as the Abdm sandbox. So any entity which is interested in understanding more about these building blocks or integrating their software with these building blocks, basically, please go check out ndhm sandbox.ndhm.gov.in, and you'll find all the APIs, the documentation, some support for to be able to do it. There are a lot of integrators who are already in there. Here are many of some of these guys who have started their integration or finished their integration. All of this information is right now available on the sandbox. So that with that, let me end my presentation. I think I see a question in the chat, but happy to take a couple of questions if there is time for that. Kumar, I'll leave you to guide me how you want to go from here.
And thanks, Kiran. Yeah, there is definitely time for a few questions. So the first question comes in from Narayan Hegde, and he's asking, is this health ID usage can be extended to payer ecosystem?
Yes, it is being planned. In fact, Narayan, one of the advantages of the health ID is that it will be a strongly KYC ID going forward, which makes it very useful in payer context, because you also get some kind of an authentication that can be done and a verification that can be done. In fact, if you want, in government-based subsidy programs like the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which is an insurance scheme for the poor, we expect, for example, that there should be a physical auth done. So the biometric authentication that the user was present at the hospital for treatment, which is a mandate as part of that. So yes, the health ID can actually enable many kinds of payer use cases. And there is a group called SWAST, a not-for-profit called SWAST, that's actually working on open specifications for health claims exchange called HCX. And you can actually take a look at that if that's of area of interest to you.
Thanks, Kiran. One more question, and this is, how can startups use these ecosystems to create extendable solutions?
Yeah, it is actually designed exactly for that, and we hope you will identify some of these use cases. So if you are an entity, or if you're creating a startup that wants to work with either health facilities or people who have use for health data, then ABDM is for you. So we are looking for players to come in and look at how this building blocks that the government is creating can be useful for your use cases. We have already found many people who have come up with a whole bunch of ideas, and that's what they're really building on the top of the sandbox. The sandbox is open to absolutely anyone, as long as you're an entity that is registered in India or can show that you have something to do in the healthcare context. You are completely, allowed to use the sandbox at this time.
Okay. One last question, Kiran, and this is from Kanan Mani. Will there be any enforcement for facilities to register with the platform and its usage?
Yeah. So yes, that's right. So there is a whole process for a health facility to get into the health facility registry, and so that's on the. If you can go to facility.dhm.gov.in to understand the process, but fundamentally, somebody from the government, there is a verification to make sure that you really are a valid health facility before you are let into the facility registry. I can see Pramod's question there. And the expiry of the dates are going to be enforced typically during the certification process, Pramod. But yes, it is quite possible that you don't actually delete it under the hood. Then once the PDP bill is passed, you would be non-compliant to the law and could be able to, be responsible for the penal provisions that are part of the bill. So from a technology architecture perspective, when your consent has expired, of course, the Health Information Exchange and CM also notifies you that, hey, it's expired, or you could even revoke your consent. Anytime after you have granted a consent to somebody to get access to your data, you have the right to go revoke a consent. And so even in the case of a revoke, we expect any copy of the data that is available at the HIU to be deleted. And if it doesn't delete, so whether it's deleting or not is something that's actually tested when it gets certification process. But we all know that certification is not enough, and there needs to be overarching laws and penal enforcements if you really want to make it work. But that's really coming. But fundamentally, if someone is found to be doing it and it gets reported, they are likely to be thrown out of the ABDM and blacklisted from the ABDM ecosystem for sure.
Thanks, Kiran. That was very insightful. And for a lot of folks who are from the startup ecosystem and making products for India, I think ABDM would be transformational. And one thing that we from a startup see is the use of health ID itself is so powerful and so many ways and means that we can use it. Thanks, thanks, Kiran, for your talk.
All the best. Want to wish all the participants the very best on this connectathon. So I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of exciting innovations you guys are able to do. And I'm sure there's also a lot of scope for everyone to be learning. I can see Kumar's organizing quite a few learning sessions. So, have fun while you're at it. And thank you for having me today, Kumar.
Thank you. Thanks, Kiran. Thank you. With this, we move on to the next agenda item for today's session, and that's the track presentations by the track leads. So we already had FHIR starter track presented. So now let's move on to the next track, and the next track, terminology track. So Dr. Pramod, if you're there.
Can I have a couple of minutes? Maybe ABDM track would be better now.
Sure.
That Kiran has spoken.
ABDM track, Sally, Ritika.
Yes, Saili here.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sure.
You can share a screen.
Yes. Is the screen visible?
Visible.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I'm Saili Pofarkar from CDAC Pune, and I will give you a brief orientation about the ABDM implementation track. So, as all of you are aware that ABDM is working on bringing interoperability for digital health in India, where ABDM will manage the foundational digital building blocks told by Kiran that to be adopted by all the healthcare providers in the country and who wants to get on board to the mission. So here we have proposed the track in HL7 FHIR Connectathon, which will give you a hands-on experience on how to get on board to the ecosystem. So the objectives of the track is to know about the ABDM Aishman Bharath Digital Mission and its various components. Once you know the system, that will give you very good idea about how, what all you can do from your side. And then we will cover how to get on board on the ABDM network. So after you know the system, what we are planning to do in our track is to generate the data in a standardized format and validate that data before sending it over a network. So you know the system now. Now you have generated data in a standardized format, which is a FHIR format. That is the data which is being exchanged between the information different entities of ABDM. So we will generate that data. As Kiran mentioned, there are different health information types or record types. There are 7 record types that is being exchanged currently in the ABDM system. So we will know about the structure, FHIR structure of all those records, and we will generate that data programmatically. And then see, once you know the system, now you have the data. Now we will know about how we can build a building of HIPs and HIUs. We will register, we will try registration to the sandbox. So to know detailed coverage of the track, while introducing to the Aishman Bharath, we will tell you about the building blocks of ABDM, which has health ID, consent manager and gateway, DigiDoctor, the doctor registry, and the facility registry. So there are several entities in the ecosystem that integrate with these building blocks, like HIPs, health information providers, HRP, that is a health repository provider, HI HIU, that is a health information user and health loggers, which actually integrate with the building blocks. So we will give you a brief about all these building blocks and entities. Kiran has already given a very good insight of that. So we will give maybe a quick overview of those. Then we will walk through a FHIR implementation guide for ABDM, which exactly tells you about what all record types are there, which which will be exchanged in the ecosystem. There are total 7 HI types for different purpose. Like there is a OP consultation note, discharge summary, immunization record, wellness record. So there are different HI types. We will go through all these records and whatever profiles, all are these HL7 profiles based on the compositions and different FHIR profiles. Then we will, considering a use case, what we will do, we will target a couple of profiles or a couple of records, and we will generate programmatically generate that objects of HI types, and we will validate those HI types. We will have a couple of use cases there while generating programmatically those HI types using Happy Library. And then we will have an overview of sandbox process and more, basically onboarding to the NDHM. So this is in detail what we will cover in the track. So what ABDM implementation track takeaway will be, you will have a knowledge of ABDM architecture, the knowledge of structure of data that is getting exchanged in the environment, and how to onboard to the ABDM. The prerequisites required would be FHIR specification. One must be aware of the FHIR specification, resources, and the basic structure. Then knowledge of Happy FHIR library will be beneficial because we will be doing hands-on using that library, and Java programming, since the library is build on that programming language. Now, intended audience would be all the implementers, vendors, startups who want to get on board to the ABDM ecosystem and wants to build application for different entities for different purpose, and those who want to know about the ABDM ecosystem. And the track leads would be Manisha Mantri and Ritika Jain, and there are several co-leads who will be helping you throughout the track. Then way forward, what we are currently planning, we will have 2 pre-connectathon sessions, where the first connectathon session will be on Wednesday, November 17th, 5 to 6 p.m. Where we will give you, as already Kiran has given you a brief introduction, we will give quick recap of that, and FHIR implementation guide for ABDM, where we will explain you what all HI types are there, and maybe we can initialize the sandbox registration process because it takes time for approval. We can think of that, and there currently the second pre-connectathon session is planned on 23rd. We can change as per our need, where we will discuss the use case that we will be doing on the connectathon, and we will work on the preparation of data, what all is required, and we can create a health ID creation we can do, and preparation required for building HIPs and HIUs. And on connectathon, the quick recap will be there again, and programmatically we will generate we will populate, serialize, validate, then parse that HI type using Happy Library, and we will have a hands-on on exchange of data between HIPs and HIUs. So this is how currently we have planned the complete track. Let's meet on Wednesday for the first session, and then we can, as per the interest and requirement, we can have sessions, next sessions planned. Thank you, Satya.
Thank you, Sally. And so thanks, Sally. And with this, we go to the next. Dr. Pramod, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm fine. I was just hoping Sally would show the NRCES page which has the NDHM FHIR artifacts, but that's okay. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that we will cover in the session. If you want, I can show it, but it will take time to explain all.
Okay, no, not explain. Just we show it because we're going to be referring to it. Okay, anyway.
Yeah, sure, sure.
You can put the link in the chat.
Yeah, just so that people are aware, because we are going to be, in our tracks.
Yes, sure. If
Thank you.
You permit, Satyam, shall I share my screen or ping the link to the chat?
The link would be better.
Okay. I'll ping.
Thank you. Dr. Pramod, over to you.
Yeah. So I'll just share my screen here. Screen 2, yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not going to go into, because sometimes when you go into this mode, it gets funny. So I'm not going to go into that mode so that, I'm guessing this is enough for being able to get the needed. All right. So a brief introduction about what the track is, so that we have an idea of what the track is going to cover. See, the objective of terminology tracks in FHIR Connectathons overall, and even in India, is we basically require, you see, part of what FHIR is working towards interoperability is, it is also working towards, what is known as synthetic as well as semantic interoperability, so that, you understand, and even the system that is sending it and the system receiving it are both on the same page of understanding what the basic message or what the sort of transaction is about, right? Now, for that, you require certain standards and terminologies, which you keep hearing again and again. And this particular track of terminology covers that aspect in detail about what are the standards, where do we get the standards from, and then, a little explanation, and then we try out various sort of scenarios of using the standards, getting it incorporated, or getting it sort of from terminology servers and so on. That is what the basic idea of the terminology track is. It's meant to be fairly important for all aspects and all the other tracks also in the FHIR world or in the FHIR Connectathons. So I just kind of highlighting, because you might keep hearing this. Now, this year, we have a very specific use case. Last year, we had covered about what is, the terminologies, and had SNOMED and LOINC, and we had clinicians, and we had teams of clinicians and also a FHIR experts, working together to get introduced to all these terminologies and so on. It was fairly successful. And now we are actually hitting the ground running. We are coming up, the idea of the FHIR Connectathon for the terminology track this time is we are trying out something before actually deploying it in the ABDM. I think you've heard Kiran saying, he's talked about the LOINC code. He's talked about the fact of getting the understanding of diagnostic reports, and therefore we are using this forum actually to carry out simulations, which will be hopefully really put into real deployment in the ABDM in the first quarter of 2022, maybe even as early as January. We have our sites ready, we have our labs ready who are willing to incorporate and try these out. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is basically concentrating on the lab flow loop. What does it mean? It basically means that from a clinic, a doctor or a clinician or so on will be sending out a lab request to an external lab. That lab request will go across to the external lab using FHIR artifacts. And then the external lab will carry out the test and send back the result in, again, FHIR artifacts, which are concerned. I will be naming the FHIR artifacts down the line. Now, the second thing that is happening is, for the last 4 or 5 months, with HL7 India's support, there has been something called the LOINC India Working Group, consisting of rather senior and experts in this specific standard called LOINC. Especially those who have implemented it in India, for example, like Apollo Health Systems and other lab systems who have actually implemented it. And we have been working towards curating the various international LOINC codes towards what is required in India. Because in India, we have some special cases, we have some special, for example, in India, we use lakhs, okay, instead of millions, we use lakhs. And that actually comes into play in platelet count and all that, which for right now, as you know, dengue is going on. So we are trying to uniform all that so that it's understood across different lab systems. right? So there is a need for this curation of a Loink India database. So that is the work that's been going on, and it's almost ready. And therefore, we are actually utilizing what we've been working on in the last 4-5 months in this track. Now, there are two simulations we are trying out. One is in the case where the ordering system, something like an EHR system in a clinic, has already got the Loink codes incorporated into their lab orders and so on. Okay. And similarly, the lab chain or the lab system that is sending the report back is also supposed to be having Loink incorporated into them. So both in the order being sent across to the lab via something called a service request FHIR artifact will have Loink incorporated in that, embedded there from the incorporation. And then similarly, the diagnostic report coming out of the lab back to the clinic will also be having Loink incorporated in that. This is one scenario. For example, the big lab chains in India will be able to do this because they can have the wherewithal to incorporate this Loink codes into their system, especially with certain automated algorithms that we are coming up with the help of NRCS and others. Then the second scenario, which is being tried again, looked at very keenly, is there is a concept of something known as terminology server. What happens here is you need not have the Loink code or the whatever relevant terminology code. For example, even for SNOMED, for diagnosis and all that, it need not be incorporated into your database or into your application. What you can do is you can actually use an API call to look up this in a terminology server and bring that code in for that particular lab test or for diagnosis or whatever it is, and bring in that terminology code which is relevant to that into the system, into the system or into that artifact which you are going to be sending out, right? So that becomes a very powerful tool, because that means in India we have over 100,000 labs, by the way. It's more like almost 110,000 labs. So it is not going to be really possible for every one of the labs. In fact, probably we expect maybe 30% of the labs may incorporate. The rest of them may have to be dependent on this mechanism, of whereby they look up terminology servers and bring in the required code or standard when required. Remember, this also helps us in scaling up very quickly, because then you don't have to go through that painful process of mapping the actual Loink code to your own proprietary codes. So we are looking at this mechanism also trying out this paradigm also very keenly, and seeing how well it will work. It should work. There is no reason why it should not work. Just got to put some things in place, and hopefully it will work. People will ask, why is it? How do you know in rural areas and all that? Believe me, rural areas connectivity is coming. 2022 Skylink is already starting, and they will come. It's like having, direct TV, whatever your Tata Sky TV and all. You'll be also having broadband coming in like that through Starlink and through OneWeb and so on. Okay, so what are we hoping to achieve? We are hoping to achieve to make all this work. One is, the workflow and the information flow of our doctors sending out this particular everything digital. Okay, he's doing it from his order entry system in his EHR. He's sending out a lab request, which is going to an external lab through a health information exchange like the NDHM, okay, or rather the ABDM, reaching that particular lab correctly because it has got identifiers which it looks up from the health facility registry and so on. And then the lab doing the needed test and sending back the result, which should come hopefully to the correct, correct patient's record and the correct encounter and so on. Because now you have health facility registry for the knowing which is the clinic. You have the health provider registry, which gives you an ID for who is the doctor who asked for it. You have an health ID to tell you who is the patient for whom you asked for it, right? So you only need to put in an encounter ID and maybe an order ID and so on. All right. So that information flow we are going to be looking at very carefully. It has to be absolutely accurate. If it goes wrong, that means, it's not only confidentiality, but it can actually lead to a lot of misinformation and wrong record going to the wrong place, which is the most dangerous thing. So we will be looking at that flow very carefully. The next thing is, like I mentioned, leveraging that terminology services, where you can have a lookup terminology service sending you the needed code so that you don't have this code necessarily incorporated in your system. And we will be actually simulating that. And then, of course, the practicality of deployment of the Loink India database. So what can we use the Loink India database? Can we just use it as the reference Loink database for India, where you just have to know, okay, this is the code for this particular test and this unit that we use? Or can you actually use it as a terminology service? Is there some way what has to be done in case we have to use this terminology service? So then these are the above mentioned simulations, and believe me, we are doing it to be actually ready to deploy it from hopefully Jan 2022, if not in the first quarter of 2022. And hopefully this will be the tipping spear to convince even the NDHM and the ABDM that, listen, you can't cross. No need to depend only on PDF documents, right? Okay. So track leads myself and Revati. Revati is a real expert in FHIR, and especially, many years from Philips. And we also have the guest international expert, fortunately with us, Dr. Rob Howson, who's actually one of the founders of the terminology track, was very actively involved with us even last year, and even this year has already shown keen interest to be involved with us and volunteered his time to be part of us. In this time, he also happens to be the chair and the co-chair of the orders and observation work groups, which is exactly what we are trying out right now, right? Kiran Anandampillai has been very supportive for us. He has helped us in many, many ways, including getting funding for us for the Loink database, for the Loink India database. Dr. Karanveer is another person who I'm hoping to pull in once in a while to give his expert opinion, because he has actually carried out this Loink integration into an entire national system, which is the Apollo Health system. Apollo Health has already got Loink integrated and incorporated into lab information systems, as well as their EHR systems and all. And they know what works for India, what does not work for India, what you got to watch out for, and so on. Right. So, like I said, the specifications that we'll be using, especially Loink, but we also will have SNOMED. Then you have to have identifiers for the organization, for the provider, for the patient, right? All this will come up from the HFR, what was known as Health Facility Registry and Health Professional Registry. That's what the assumption is. Then for the encounter, for the order IDs, all these will be sort of the identifiers. We'll have to make sure it gets into the relevant FHIR artifacts so that can go to and fro correctly. The artifacts of focus are the service request and diagnostic report. If you visit the link that I think Sally has sent by now, you will see that these are already published. In fact, good work has been done by many of you last year in the profile track, and now you'll have put it up into this thing. And we have also, as a follow-up to last year's terminology track, looked at these very carefully and given feedback about trying to improve them. But now we are actually going to try it out and see if it works, what doesn't work, and so on. Expected participants, definitely all folks involved with lab one way or the other, whether they are making systems, whether they are lab chains, whether they, whether you are a person who's ordering labs, like clinicians, whether you are a hospital who's using lab, all these folks are involved. And as you know, lab results are among the most important things that are needed in especially in clinical information, the clinical information world. By the way, what I want to mention is, why is it that Loink was chosen for lab results and for results like diagnostic, even imaging and all? Because Loink is free. Okay. You have SNOMED terms also for many of these lab results and lab tests and so on. But the reason why SNOMED was not chosen for lab results and lab tests and vitals was because Loink is free for anybody and the entire world. SNOMED is not. Fortunately for us, India has a national license for SNOMED. But maybe if you're in Nepal or maybe if you're in Bangladesh, you cannot use SNOMED. But you still need lab results, you still need vitals. That's why these are two places where Loink comes in, because it is being provided for free to anybody in the world to use. Okay. So that basically is the giving you an idea of what the sort of track is about. The system roles, naturally, we need an ordering system like an EMR, because we got to send out orders and make sure the results come and sit in the correct place, the correct patient, and so on. We may not require a lab information system, because remember, we are not really doing some certification of any lab information system. It is the information going between a so-called LIS or between a EHR, a hospital and a lab that we are interested in, the flow between the two. We are not particularly looking into the actual workings of a lab information system. If we get hold of one, well and good. Otherwise, we can probably manage to manually put in the codes that are required in the diagnostic report to send back. What you have to look at very carefully is when the diagnostic report goes back, is it going to the correct place, correct patient, correct encounter, etc., etc. Okay, so the systems involved, naturally the LOIC in their database is going to be the reference database that we'll be using. And then there are terminology services. Fortunately for us, even LOIC International, LOIC organization offers a terminology service for LOIC. So, I don't think there's too much of a problem for us to be able to get that in place. What are we planning in the next 2 weeks? I have not fixed the dates as yet. I will look at what the other tracks are doing and we'll choose a date. Once we are introduced to our participants and attendees, we'll have a sort of get together and see a date that is convenient for everybody. Maybe in the weekends, if it is weekends, is best for everyone. We'll be having two or hopefully every week at least one session. In the next 2 weeks, we will firstly cover basic principles of terminology and standards, so that even if you've never attended terminology or FHIR before, you're at least brought more or less onto the same page. An introduction to LOIC specifically, because there are certain things about LOIC which has to be understood, and why there are 6 other associated parameters which have to be explained for LOIC in every test. Then there'll be an introduction specifically to the service requests and diagnostic report artifacts. We'll be studying that very carefully, including looking at where does the identifiers go and so on. And then, of course, we work out the workflow and information flow in these 2 weeks, because that is the first thing that we have to work out and see what has to go through. Fortunately, I have very expert and very well-versed co-leads and other helping me out. Folks like Revati and so on are there, and including Venu. He has kindly agreed to help us out in this track and try to get things going. So with that, I kind of finished, hopefully, my orientation.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So, sir, one thing that will help is actually if you fix the date, right?
Yeah, I will do that. I mean, I will send that out once. I just noticed that Revati and all have got already dates fixed. We hopefully will be either Friday, Saturday, but let me have a round of, once we know who the participants are, we'll just send out some messages to them and get some suggestions from them.
Yes, the idea is also like this. So once you publish the dates, the people who are joining on those dates would likely be your participants. Okay. So we'll send, yeah.
So I think maybe most probably Fridays or Saturdays or something like that. I'll just speak to my other colleagues and also see when the other tracks are, because I think it's best if it doesn't clash with other tracks, so that
true. Yeah,
people who are jumping tracks can attend the.
Sure. Thanks, sir.
Welcome. Any questions, or I have not seen the chat of the.
Yes, maybe the questions can be taken in the chat. Okay. Thank you, sir. With this, we move on to the next track, FHIR server implementation track. Arun, if you're there.
Yes, I am there. Dr. Pramod, can I share my screen, please?
Yeah, just a moment. Let me just stop for this sharing. Where is it? Give me a minute here. I'm just trying to stop share. Okay. It should be yours.
Yeah, done. Yeah.
Okay. My screen is visible, right?
Yes.
Okay. So welcome to the FHIR server implementation track intro. A brief intro was given yesterday, so there may be a bit of repeat. I know that yesterday not everybody could join the call. So for the benefit of people who were not able to make it yesterday, certain things may be new for you. So first and foremost, what I would want everybody is to be connected, right? So we have a specific Confluence page. People who are attending this particular track, either as a primary or a secondary, please do take it. And I would suggest each one of you to actually take the screenshot and be connected on Zulip and as well as Confluence. It may so happen that even in the last minute, you may want to come into this particular track. Okay, so let me introduce you to my team. This track was proposed by Shrikant Joshi. He is the Vice President in Persistent Systems. And he nominated me as a track lead. So thanks, Shrikant, for that. In my team, I have Geetanjali. She's also from Persistent, and as well as Akshata and Harpreet. All the three of them have extensive experience in terms of using the Happy FHIR server. So moving on, what are the objectives and outcomes? it is simple. It's basically a starting point for participants to put their FHIR knowledge into practice. And when I mean this, after going through the various presentations that you would have seen today, it is a chance for you to garner information from various other track pre-connectathons, whether it be ABDM or whether it could be Pramod Jacob's track on terminology, etc. Right? You take information over there and you can come over here and implement those, right? And so we basically cover the facade and report FHIR server implementation. And after participating the tracks, what would the participants would be able to do? Basically implement a facade server and as well as a repository server. Some of the basics. Now, these are going to be the foundation ones. From here, you can build on what else, all the extra things that is required as per your use cases. Of course, we would be performing extraction, ingestion, and retrieval steps within an application workflow, which is also usually required in any scenario. And of course, you will also become familiar with resource extensions, custom types, and interceptors. One of the things that has always been asked is how are you going to securitize your FHIR server? So certain recommended steps and ideas is going to be provided during the connectathon. So moving on. So one of the things that I have mentioned over here, sorry. You will be able to contribute to various use cases of ABDMH, ABDHM, right? Let me just take a slide out of their website. Now, this is how the high-level scenario is going to be. Now, here, if you could see that there is something called as a repository, right? So there are HIUs and there are going to be HIPs. And amongst all this entire information exchange, there's going to be a repository server. So somebody has to create these repository servers. This could be your stepping stone for creating such repository servers. Next is you have the hospital information systems and laboratory information systems that needs to exchange data. So which basically means that they internally have to have a facade against an existing data source. So the facade is going to help you in if you come from that particular background. Now, also what we are going to use within this particular scenario is the ABDM FHIR profile, as opposed to a generic profile given by United States. We are going to use that profile itself, and we are going to also use the HL7V2 to ABDM ABDHM FHIR profiles as given in their website. So moving on, the intended audience for this particular track are solution architects, product owners, developers, participants of previous tracks, open houses, meetups, and as well as students. One of the common questions that I get is, I'm not a Java developer. This looks like it is going to be more of Java. What my suggestion to them is, come in as a team, as an architect with one or two developers. Create the solution as a team. And this is, so what you're going to learn over here, okay, what is the expectation of an architect versus a developer? You can test, and if it works, it works. If it fails, it fails. But with the failure, you get lessons as to why it failed. So do that within the connectathon itself. Some of the track prerequisites, participants are expected to have some basic knowledge of FHIR, knowledge to read the resource specification. We are going to use two resources over here. One is a patient resource and observation resource. We expect them to have some amount of knowledge of each of these two resources, because these are the two resources we are going to put into practice. From a technical background, you would be required to have Java Spring Boot for creating a new project and executing applications, Spring Data, JPA, coding technologies, Maven, and basic SQL queries for performing CRUD operations, because we are going to use a facade server, and operate API clients such as Postman and Insomnia. So the software requirement for the track are as follows. You will be requiring a Git client, JDK version 11.0, Postman, Java editor, which could be either STS, NetBeans, or IntelliJ, a MySQL client, either a DB viewer or MySQL workbench. So a little bit pictorial representation of what the facade server we are going to do is, we are going to take the Open EMR database. The Open EMR database would already be pre-populated with a lot of data in it. And you will first start learning, okay, fine. So for the given database, we will also explain you the database structure within our sessions. So now that you know the database structure, how do you create a FHIR wrapper against this particular structure? Once you learn how to do it with an existing database, tomorrow you could enhance your knowledge to, rather, instead of doing a direct calls to the database, most probably you may have your internal APIs. So how you can make this as a wrapper with your existing APIs. And this facade server is going to be accessed through an AP client, either like a user interface, a Postman, or Insomnia. The second use case, as far as second use case is concerned, you are going to take we are going to build a FHIR, we are going to have a FHIR server itself, which will have its own database. You'll understand the data structures of a repository server. And what you're going to do is that you're going to take V2 messages. We will provide you the V2 messages. And how do you transform these V2 messages into a JSON? Now, basis the work that has been done earlier, right? This mapping is already available in the website. But how do you convert the idea that is there in the website into actual code is going to be taught over here. And of course, once the data is there within the FHIR server, how can you access this over various clients? So that is also going to be shown. So to understand all these things, there's going to be a lot of catch up to be done. So we have designed the 5 different orientation sessions. The first orientation session is going to be on 14th November, Sunday, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time. And this is a time where we are going to give a track orientation to the participants, where we'll try to address various questions of this particular track, what you need to do, how you need to prepare, so on and so forth. On 20th and 27th November, you will be given an introduction to FHIR. So even if you have not used this library earlier, no issues. This is the time where you are going to get in more and more info. We are planning to get, just a minute. So we are planning to have James Agnew on 27th of November, so that he gives us much more detailed information on this FHIR library. So we'll keep you posted of what is happening. And on 4th December, you will be learning of basics of Open EMR. You are going to put yourself as in the shoes of a person entering information into the EMR and then seeing, okay, hey, what happens actually into the FHIR repository. And then you're going to actually go and write the code to pull information from, not FHIR repository, from the FHIR server. Then you're going to write the code to actually pull patient information and observation information. Now, as part of the observation information, it is going to be specifically lab records, and it will have pre-populated LOINC codes. Now, of course, as of now, we are pre-populating LOINC codes. Once we have the actual more and more people using the terminology services like what Pramod Jacob said, these LOINC codes could be, I look at it in 2 different ways. One, when we do the master load, for a given description, these are all the possible LOINC codes. So this is where startups can come and think, oh, okay, fine. If LOINC codes needs to be mapped with existing existing masters, right? During the data load itself, we try to map the LOINC codes basis on the description. These are all the possibilities, which is the one that closely matches. So you will see that there's a lot of this particular track can be utilized in more and more use cases, and inputs will be taken from various other tracks. On 5th December, we are going to have a FHIR architecture framework overview. So coming to the actual session agenda of the 3 days in December, on day one and day two, first half, we are going to work on the facade server approach, and everything is going to be hands-on. Initially, we will start with the understanding the Open Emr database, and then you will see a demonstration of create, search, read functions of a patient resource. And on day two, you will have to do it complete basis the knowledge what you have got. You will be designing it for an observation resources. So what we would already give you is from an architecture, from a domain perspective, hey, this is the way how you are going to map. Or so the mappings are already done for you. So you are going to more look into the implementation part. Of course, whatever mapping we are doing is just only an idea. Okay, if this is the mapping, this is the way how we are going to implement. On second half of day two and day three, you're going to do the repository server approach, and a portion of day two you will learn of how you're going to secure your FHIR server. And on day three, you will learn about Swagger documentation and capability definition documentation. Swagger documentation, one of the reasons we have kept it in this particular track is that while capability statement is good to understand, okay, what is the capability of a given server? Fine. Now, if I decide that, hey, I want to take a particular, if I want to take a particular set of APIs, I want to check what is the documentation that is done, and thereby, so the FHIR itself gives you certain libraries and certain functions where you can create Swagger documentations in a jiffy. Developers are more used to using the Swagger documentation. So that's the reason why we have kept Swagger documentation. And next is you're going, in the end of the event, you're going to understand the open source versus commercial products like Smile CDR, and we will have some time for question and answers. Of course, whatever agenda that we have published is fluid in nature. Like I mentioned in the beginning, please ensure that you're always on Confluence. Please have a watch of on the Confluence pages for the latest information. For people who have already decided to participate in this particular track, what I would suggest is please go add yourself into this particular Confluence, into this particular Zulip chat, so that you can get updated what is happening on this particular track. Thank you. Satyam.
Thanks, Arun. Thanks. It was very detailed and very well thought of. With this, we go to the next track, FHIR Cancer Registry track. Manish, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. As part of the FHIR Cancer Registry track, our main premise of presenting and bringing this particular track to the Pre-connectathon 2021 was from the perspective of enabling an interoperable disease registry, and in a specific use case and a specific example that we'll be taking up during this particular connectathon would be the cancer registry, and how we can enable an interoperable cancer registry from an Indian context. The genesis of why we took this particular topic up was basically, if you have seen the earlier presentations, whether we see it from the Abdm track, or we see it from the track which Arun just mentioned about, or even Dr. Pramod's track, once we have specifically identified an individual, right, at least from an oncology perspective, it very specifically becomes important to present that information to the cancer registry, so that a proper track of a particular patient and patient, whether it's in a hospital kind of a scenario, or whether it is from a population-based kind of a scenario is maintained. In cancer registry per se in India, if you see from the origins, and this is a data which I have taken from the ICMR's presentation earlier this year, which was shared by Dr. Kunal with us. So as part of the origins, ICMR had set up the National Cancer Registry program in 1981. The general objective are, as indicated, and the starting information when it initially started out was 3 hospital-based registries and 3 population-based registries at these specific locations. Moving on from there, as part of the National Cancer program, they have enabled during the different years these different types of registries. They have got enabled at different parts of India, moving towards a National Cancer Registry program in 2021, where additional activities and steps have been enabled. In terms of the locations that they have shared in terms of where HBCR, which is a hospital-based cancer registry, or a population-based cancer registry exists currently in India, and therefore the way it gets captured, the data gets captured in each of these entities with the upcoming, the digital health initiatives from the government of India. Even today's presentation from Kiran mentioned one of the building blocks of a national disease registry also as an enabler. Basically, these are the current locations which are present. In terms of what are their main core focus area is not only just to enable a HBCR or a PBCR, which will be the focus of this particular track during the Connectathon, but further on, patterns of care and survival studies which can be enabled from the same data set, as well as the Cancer Atlas. The Cancer Atlas has also been enabled in certain state governments, as has been indicated over here, and the current work is also moving on towards the development of an Atlas of Cancer in India per se. Uses of health data registries is monitoring of trends in health and disease, allocating resources, priority setting for care planning, monitoring health impact, and these other aspects. Cancer as a notifiable disease, earlier this wasn't the case, but now since 2008 onwards and subsequently, different states have started enabling this particular as a requirement. Very recently, Kerala and 19th Feb also enabled cancer as a notifiable disease purely because it then helps the state also plan for certain of these initiatives that they take up. Challenges of maintaining a cancer registries. I've just highlighted the system interoperability as one of the use cases, very relevant from our perspective and statements out over here. But most of the time, if you see the kind of information that is being pulled in and collated all together of patients moving across the country, some of the scenarios which, while we were doing some of the work on this particular topic internally also, we found that there needs to be probably some updates that we can provide to the work that we had done in the last year's Connectathon for the different profiles. So that particular aspect also, we hope to present to the various teams and track leads who are taking up those different profiles and the resources which will be helpful in coming up with probably an updated with an additional context that can be provided. Patient move from challenges again continues based on the lot of movement of patients happening across different hospitals, across geographies. The patient needs to find care and cure closer to home, and that not being available, they tend to move their location, and therefore the poor documentation at a medical record section within a hospital, and therefore the migration of patients within and outside the registry area also becomes a challenge. So how we can, once the patient has been identified and once the consent has now been available for the data records to kind of literally follow the patient, and how this can enable a much more seamless provision from a cancer registry perspective. The information that is generally collected within there are these different aspects, which is what we will further drill down into how each of these different two forms, which we'll be taking up as part of our discussions during the cancer registry track discussions. What we have tried to do is enable a week-on-week agenda all the way up till the end of the Connectathon, wherein we will start by reviewing what these different HBCR and PBCR forms are, review of M code, a standard which will help inform our understanding of what kind of resources and profiles we need to create. Thereafter, in the week 2, we'll move towards mapping of the data elements to the specific FHIR resources and test out the design of the resource and set of resources, and as well as create the profiles. Week 3, we hope to arrive at the India Cancer Registry IG and share that with the team at the Connectathon. And at week 4, basically educate on the use of the FHIR-based IG, which is obviously the India Cancer Registry. Therefore, how different systems across the tracks and each of you building out these different platforms can interact with that particular IG and make your own specific use cases. During the Connectathon, we'll revisit all of these 4 weeks work that we have done during each of the days, showcase that to the teams, to the participants who will be coming on during the Connectathon, and help them test out the implementation guide and test out the FHIR associated specifications during that entire process. So that's what we'll be up to at the Cancer Registry track, and you're most welcome to connect with us on the same 2 channels as has been indicated by the HL7 India team. We'll be happy to take any questions and have you join us in this particular track as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish. Very detailed. So with this, we have time for 5-10 minutes for questions. And if there are no questions, what we can do is we have still 4 tracks which are not finalized, okay, which are still in the proposal state. So we can open those if the track proposers are online. They can pitch their tracks, what they plan to do, and just make it more social with the participants, so that participants are aware of those tracks, right? So while the questions can go in the chat, maybe it's a good idea to have the respective proposed track proposers to come on stage, take 5 minutes and explain about your track and what you intend to do. So with that, I'll get the first track on. That's structured data capture, which is a very, very strategic track. And it will actually be required in most of the tracks that are there. So Avanti, if you are there.
Yes. Am I audible?
Please. Yeah, please, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Is my screen visible? Hello?
Yes, visible. Yeah.
Okay. So apologies for yesterday's interrupted session, and kindly excuse me, I'm using the old template for the presentation. So hello, this is Avanti from Pune, and I'll be leading the structured data capture track. So we had seen this slide yesterday. I'll reiterate it. So this track intends to design and test FHIR questionnaire and questionnaire response resources conformant to the Sdc implementation guide. So if you have seen the FHIR-based specifications, there are a couple of resources which we normally use. So these were special resources which I came across and found very interesting, and therefore I ventured into this work area. So a few selected forms and questionnaires in the Indian healthcare system will be converted into FHIR questionnaires and questionnaire responses and tested for a viable design approach for consistent, coherent data collection. Okay, so not just interested in the structured data capture thing, I was also interested in converting that into Indian context, and which I tried on my own after getting some training from HL7 International. And I hope that the participants in this track will be interested in doing so. Okay, so the target audience for this track would be solution architects, application front-end developers, UX UI designers, clinicians who are interested or involved in form design, and for that matter, any FHIR enthusiast who wish to explore SDC, because this is a specialized area in which FHIR also works. So what are the use cases that we would be considering? So we'll be considering general wellness questionnaire, which has simple questions like whether you slept well, whether you did your exercise, whether you have your proper food intake, etc. So this is a very generic questionnaire which one can begin with, and it's also interesting to figure it out how it works and how it can be developed using the structured data capture thing. Then you have comorbidities. So in medicine, a condition which is along with the primary condition is called as a comorbidity. So there was a concern regarding how can we mention these conditions and how can we represent that in the user interfaces. So I think structured data capture has a solution for monitoring comorbidities and help you with that. Then we move on to the lab test reports. So this was also a very interesting work area, and we can have a lot of R&D in this area and generate some good reports which are there in the intent context. Then health calculator. This might be something interesting. Now, what do you mean by health calculator? So you have a lot of scoring panels in medicine. You have risk assessment tools. You have some specialized disease assessment tools like diabetes tools, hypertension tools, etc. Then you have gender-wise tools these days also for men's health calculator, women's health calculator, etc. So there is a lot of variety in this thing. So we'll pick up some basic calculator which the participants would like to create, and we'll go ahead with it. Then the last thing is the hospital-based cancer registry form. So we would also like to take up forms which are used in a registry in a public domain. So this was related to the previous track which Manish rightly mentioned, hospital-based cancer registry. So we wanted this to relate to other tracks also, like for lab test report, we would like to relate this to the terminology track which they are working upon. So this way the use cases were designed, and it was from the simple use case gradually progressing towards a bit complex use cases. So what are the tools you need to do this? So questionnaires are designed and rendered using LHC FHIR tools. Now these tools are readily available. They are free of cost. You need not even log in those tools. You just have to use this effectively and work over it. I'll give you a demonstration shortly. And for the track lead, I am the track lead. And just today, I had a word with Dr. Siddharth Ramesh. So he has agreed to be the co-lead for this track. So welcome Siddharth Ramesh, if you're already there. Let's move on to the presentation. Okay, so what are the track prerequisites? You need knowledge of forms and questionnaires in the healthcare domain. Although we have considered simple use cases, but still having the knowledge would be beneficial because we need to understand what data elements needs to be captured, and knowledge of FHIR. So you can attend the FHIR starter track and then join this track. That would be beneficial. Or if you are already well versed with FHIR, you can directly join in here. Okay. So SDC sessions that are planned, we have planned 4 sessions. So session 1 will be brief on the FHIR base specification. So we'll be particularly focusing on questionnaire and questionnaire response resources only. Then for session 2, we'll be having a brief on the SDC IG, which actually has the various elements which are used in the structured data capture for advanced form rendering. Then session 3, we'll have a brief walkthrough with LHC FHIR tools. And session 4, understanding the use cases. So I think these sessions would prepare the participants for actually creating the questionnaires in the Connectathon track. So I'm the track lead, and Dr. Siddharth Ramesh would be the co-track lead. Okay.
Thanks,
So
Avanti.
I would like to give a brief demonstration, Satyam.
In the interest of time, because other tracks as well.
Yeah, just 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
So is my screen visible? Yeah. So this is how, so this is the LHC FHIR tools website. Okay. So the tools are available there. You just have to go there and use those tools. Now we are at the LHC forms demo. So this is how a questionnaire looks like. So you must be having a question, what exactly we are doing, how is the output and everything. So when you create a questionnaire using these tools, this is how the questionnaire will look like. So this is a blank questionnaire, right? This is a blank form. And when you fill it, it becomes a questionnaire response. So this is a sample there. You can check on the website, patient health questionnaire, which has 4 items. Okay. I'll show you another tab. Same thing. Do you find any difference in this, in the display of this, right? Can I have some answer, please?
There are choices.
Yeah, but this also has choices. So these looks a bit neat and clean form, right? Isn't it? From a developer's perspective, this is a fine form. Okay, but I would say this form is better. Why? It still has the same values. Yeah.
Yeah, users can see all the values.
Exactly. At a glance, you can see this at a glance. Here you don't have to keep guessing. Here you have to click, right? See this. All the values are present there, but still. So if let's consider for a minute that I am the user, I am the clinician. 10 patients are waiting there, and I have to fill this form. So okay, I'm just picking any random values. So click 1, click 2, click 1, click 2, click 1, click 2, click 1, click 2. How many clicks? 8, right? Right. And if I have 10 patients, 80 clicks, right? But if I have this kind of interface, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? This was better or no?
Indeed.
Yeah, exactly. So as a developer, when we start developing software and user interfaces, we are prone to doing these things. We feel this is right. But if you see from the user's perspective, if you see the clinician situation, which has, I just said 10 patients, you have a lot of patients, they have to deal with a lot of things, this becomes a really pain for them. So I think as a user experience, we need to consider these things also. Although we are dealing with FHIR and JSON and everything, these things are also important, I think, and we need to work on this, right? So if I consider this form, this just have 4 clicks, everything is at a glance, and 4 into 10. So in 40 clicks, you can finish up with 10 patients, right? So this was a better thing to do. Now this was just a simple patient health questionnaire with 4 items. But in reality, when the clinicians are dealing with EHRs and EMRs, they have a lot of complex user interfaces to fill the data with. So I think we should help them come out with new solutions, come out with some different solutions, think out of the box, and help them to have a better user experience. And we are working with FHIR definitely. So if you see this, we'll have a walk through this. See, if you see the FHIR SDC questionnaire, this comes as the FHIR JSON, right? So this is for the blank questionnaire, right? So this is the JSON which you have. And if you fill the values, if I select FHIR SDC questionnaire response, this comes with the values. You can see the values, not at all, several days, exactly, right? So this is the FHIR questionnaire response. This is how the tool works. And now you can download these things, and we would be testing this as a double cross check on the FHIR server also, public test server. You can use the Postman client and post the resources and check whether these JSONs are really working or not. So this was all about the SDC tracks. Hope to see you all in the FHIR Connectathon. Do join us, and let's make this a big success. Thank you, Satyam.
Thank you, Avanti. The next track, FHIR and DICOM track. Anand, Revati, are you there?
Yes, Satyam, I'm there. Am I audible?
Yes. Please be 5 minutes or 7 minutes, because we are running out of time.
Yeah, sure. Let me know once you see my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. In fact, yesterday I actually covered a bit about this track. So as most of us are aware, reports is one form of information exchange. The other form of information or data exchange is typically the images. So even though we have reports and detailed descriptions of the disease or the diagnosis present, some of the clinicians and the care providers, preferably in the oncology, cardiology, or the radiology or the anatomic pathology spaces, prefer to see the images along with the reports. So that's what this track aims to bring together the clinical information along with the accompanying image related information, so that we could holistically present it to the care provider or to the patient themselves if they need to share it from their primary to a secondary. So what actually led to the need for this track is that sharing of the images is a primary use case, as I mentioned. Also, there is a need that patients undergo a particular procedure or a study in one particular location, switch their care providers, but I have to undergo these procedures again, actually adding to the cost and all the related duplications that accompanies with it. So if you provide a digital mechanism to exchange these images along with the patient's previous history, reports, etc., then the idea is that this cost could be, or the duplication and all the related aspects of patient care could be optimized, and also the cost aspects could be reduced. In fact, that was the primary need that actually led to this proposal of this particular track. In fact, the track lead for this particular track is Anand. Anand is from Siemens and myself from Philips. So collectively together, we bring in around 20 years of DICOM experience and around 10 years of FHIR experience. And hence we actually put together this particular track. And hence the need that this track actually is trying to meet, in fact, trying to bring in two interoperability standards together, that is the DICOM as well as the FHIR, in order to enable furthermore optimized clinical workflows where both these information could be presented holistically. In fact, also we see that earlier, if CDs and DVDs were given for the different images, and currently that practice is becoming outdated, and there is actually a need for a digital medium to replace this as we exchange the reports. Hence that led to this particular track. So what are the objectives that we are and the goals that we are trying to achieve via this track? First thing is the education aspect, where we want to educate the Connectathon participants with respect to how the different interoperability standards actually could come together to realize a specific clinical workflow. And for that purpose, we actually picked up a very simple IHE scheduled workflow, which could be used in radiology, cardiology, oncology, to that matter, any oncology space in a generic manner. So that's the very simple workflow that we actually picked up. Model that workflow using both DICOM as well as the FHIR entities. I'll just give you a glimpse of it in a brief and see how these two standards could come together to enable simple workflow. So that's what we actually want to achieve. The first objective being the education. The second objective being demonstration of the simple workflow via the systems that actually get registered as part of this particular track from the different players in this particular ecosystem, and also demonstrate this integration. So that is the second objective. The third objective is that, as Kiran actually mentioned, within the ABDM ecosystem, there are around 7 ways or 7 types of reports that actually can be exchanged. It could be either discharge summaries, could be OP consultation, or could be any other diagnostic records that could be exchanged. But the need for an accompanying image also to be exchanged along with these documents is something that we want to figure out from practicality perspective on how all these could be brought together within the ABDM ecosystem. So that's actually the third objective that we want to achieve as part of this track. Okay, so moving on. So who are the participants that can engage and also play around and also benefit from this track? Primarily the radiology, cardiology, or any oncology information systems where the clinical information also is distributed, exchanged along with the related images, where these both can come together to provide a holistic meaning actually to the care provider with respect to the information that they are looking for. The second category of participants primarily would be the image storing systems. Typically, the information systems are separate from the image storing systems, say like PACS or any kind of DICOM stores. So how the information systems and the image storing systems can come together to collaboratively connect these different entities in a given workflow is what we want to actually target as part of this track. The other participants could be vendors and providers of these particular system, whom we actually look forward to register yourself so that you could actually connect with other vendors in this particular ecosystem to test on how it could be exchanged. Images could be exchanged along with reports. Primarily, the other important and key aspects is the participants like the solution architects, product managers, product owners, developers themselves, and the interoperability SMEs who can actually benefit from this track to see how the different interoperability standards can come together to solve problems related to specific workflow. FHIR cannot standalone solve everything. DICOM standalone cannot solve everything. So what we try to achieve as part of this track is to bring about the collective coherence between the different interoperability standards. Some of the prerequisites, DICOM is actually a slightly advanced standard, and with the time what we have at hand, the need is actually to have some level of hands-on working experience with respect to either classic DICOM or the DICOM web technologies, because the education part with respect to DICOM becomes quite large, and that's what we intend to cut down as part of this track, where we primarily want to focus on the association aspects of DICOM with FHIR rather than just target only the DICOM piece. Also, some minimal knowledge of FHIR is what we expect, primarily on how to leverage resources, say like imaging study. In fact, there would be some educational tutorials that we also would be covering as part of this track to actually provide certain prior knowledge, but good. Some level of prior knowledge of FHIR is always a bonus here, actually.
Revati, just one more minute. We have 2 more tracks to go.
Yeah, sure, Satyam. So as I mentioned, we want to highlight the synergies of different interoperability standards, some of the use cases that we have actually shortlisted for this particular track. Enabling image exchange along with reports, enriching the image data with the data that is got from, say, EHR systems via FHIR. That could be other directional work use case that we would be also looking up. And if time permits, we also might target on how these two could come together from in the analytics space. So that's the 3 aspects that we want to see, along with how the ABDM ecosystem, how we could enable the exchange of images. In fact, this is a very quick overview on the different FHIR resources with respect to the scheduled workflow that we intend to target. And the key focus area on the FHIR would be primarily with respect to usage of imaging study and few more related FHIR resources, as I mentioned here, to enable certain workflows. And one thing what we would learn is like when to use FHIR and when to use DICOM. So that is the key aspect that we would want to target as part of this track. So just concluding with respect to the next steps, as this track is not yet finalized, in fact, we are looking for an active participation in terms of registering your systems, primarily in this particular track, registration of track participants, and also we would also be forming a small organizing team for this track. So please reach out to me or Anand if you're interested. And next week is where we would want to detail out the schedule, as well as with respect to the webinars and the subsequent ecosystem and test samples, test data, etc. So please reach out if you would like to contribute and be part of this track organizing team to me or Anand or Kumar, any of us. So these are the contacts. So that's all I had. Over to you, Satyam.
Thanks, Revati. With this, we move on to the next track. That's the consent management track. Are there proposers? Ram Ganesh, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks. Satyam.
But Ram Ganesh, be quick a little bit.
I'll try to keep the pace up. It's fine. Let me open up my. Can I share?
Please go ahead.
Let me know once you see my screen, please.
Visible.
Okay, so for the consent management, what we're thinking about is what I put together today. So what we're planning to do currently is there are 4 important aspects that we want to talk about as an overview. So the first one is secure data exchange with whitelisted applications and onboarded stakeholders. So any application whichever is interested in actually, accessing the patient data, we are trying to get it whitelisted and onboard them with the help of IAM or Keynote. And the second thing is that we want to build a comprehensive consent management interface for members or patients to actually go and do the consent declaration and also look and track their consent information and management of those consents, whatever they already have given. So that's a number 2 aspect. Number three is obviously if I'm a member or a patient, I want to go ahead and create the consents, update the consents. If I don't want to the consent to be there anymore, I want to delete it. Or if I have already given a consent before, and I have to ensure that I have retrieved those consents for various purposes. And also ensure that all the events are recorded and managed. Basically, have your audit details perfectly placed out there so that every event is captured. The other thing is members can provide consent on a specific data to be shared with whitelisted applications and providers. So for example, it's not only the interface and the member interface and where they will be able to go and give the consent. We'll also interface with or integrate with third-party apps, or if there is a member portal that provider is using and they want to actually use that as an interface for their own members, we would encourage that too. So these are the four important things that we actually want to talk about from an overview perspective. So who will benefit out of this? We are thinking about obviously the patients and members who are actually part of the whose data that belongs to, who's actually the owner of the data. Providers or even healthcare technology organizations who actually have who are actually the custodian of data, or can be somebody who wants the data. It can be life sciences companies or pharmaceutical companies who are wanting to or willing to access the patient clinical information. So all of them will be part of it. So whom we are planning to work with? We are open to get anybody who are developers or analysts, product owners, data analysts. If you have cloud expertise and you want to maybe get into it. Clinicians, students, or anybody who wants to contribute, are welcome to actually start with us on the consent management stuff. So what are we going to do? From a features or a overview perspective is there are four things that we are again planning to do. One is a granular consent. So basically, what is the level of information that needs to be shared using the consent object. Consent object is already present in the FHIR API. So member can actually choose to share, a particular information. It can be for example, say, an observation is the only one that they want to share, right? So they will be able to control that particular data using the consent object. So we need to actually build that granular consent aspects. That's kind of number one thing. And the policy constraints. So they can be an organizational policy. For example, say Max Healthcare doesn't want to actually give out information or show information about the the procedures that actually a patient went through, right? So or conditions of a particular patient, of a particular condition of the patients. For example, any kind of a behavioral health information. So that can be generally blocked through the policy constraint. So we are looking at creating a configuration where we'll be capturing exceptions and we'll ensure that that particular information is masked. That is number two. And number three is data access and authorization. So again, data access authorization will be handled for different modules basically. And what we're looking at is obviously there is a patient level data permissions that will be stored in a consent database. Other than that, you also have the authorization authentication happening through the IAM and key clock. And also we are going to be using the OAuth 2.0. So that again handles the authorization for modules. That is going to be interfacing with different applications, right? So those are the things we are looking at. And also online, offline consents, where member can actually give access to self or give consent for providers or payers. Handling multiple scenarios, handling multiple actors. Actors here, basically means any entities. Your providers are your insurance organizations, or your pharmaceutical companies, or research organizations, or anybody. So that's the major aspects. So I put together a quick interaction diagram here. So how are we going to have? How is it going to happen? The first time what you see is actually a member. Member is going to launch an app, per se, and they will be able to view the member details. So when they're going to if the member is already registered to that particular app, and then the app will actually redirect to a login. So, so I'm talking about a third-party app or a mobile app. If we don't get access to third-party mobile app, we can actually create our own interface basically. And there is a consent interface. So redirection happens through the IAM, and authentication access credentials are actually taken care of. There is an access token that's going to get passed from the IAM back to the the mobile server or any kind of interface which you're going to be working with. And the member details are actually going to get passed from the FHIR server. The FHIR server actually contains the clinical APIs and the consent API here. So once the request actually goes in for the clinical APIs, the validation happens, and then the consent is actually returned from the consent API. This is actually again captured through the consent object like we spoke about. Once we know that it's a consent exists.
In the interest of time, can you just say what's the next steps for the participants? We have one more track to go, and we are already 5 minutes over time. Please.
Okay, so the major thing is that we are looking to so we have the consent API already in place that's actually given by the FHIR, right? So we need to build a consent management interface, and we need to build a consent storage and consent rules module. So these are the things which we are actually trying to build at this point of time, in the interest of people who actually want to access the consent of the payer, for the patients. So the key functionality which we are trying to do is create consent, validate consent, token management, patient access API, and the transaction logs at this moment. So that's kind of it at this point of time, and we really want people to come in and come on board, and then maybe contribute to this and make this particular track a success. There's a lot of people looking into this, and a lot of organizations are talking about it. Even the AB even the other tracks actually need this consent to be consent to be required.
म्हणूनच तुम्ही बाहेर गेले, त्यांना म्हटलं चालू आहे अजून, पण माझं झालं.
Okay, I think that concludes my topic.
Anything where people can connect with you? Maybe
बस माझं बोलून झालंय, आता काही हरकत नाही.
That you can where people can learn more about the track.
होतेच तिला एक दिवस झालं चला.
It's there is quite a bit of already publicly available aspects for this particular topic. That's one thing, and maybe we can distribute some more information on the same thing that you can learn about. So I'll keep you posted.
Okay, thanks, Ramesh. With that, we have Manju, who will be presenting about the IPS track. Manju, are you there?
Can I share my screen?
Please do.
Still, I
yeah, you can now.
The international patient summary. This track is primarily focused on what is the minimum health record, which can be shared across systems transcending the international borders. So the minimum health record should be non-exhaustive. It should give a summary, not the complete detailed health record of the patient. It should be minimal and non-exhaustive. And even if the patient has any particular, if there is a patient is suffering from asthma, then it is not going to contain anything specifically about asthma. So hence the patient health record should be specialty agnostic and condition independent. So this particular track, the genesis of this track traces back to the European Union, where politically it has become a unified bloc that necessitated, even in terms of the healthcare, as the mobility of the members of the European Union is free across their region. can the healthcare record can also move. So there was a major thrust from the European Union to make it happen. So in terms of visualizing the Aishman Bharath digital health mission is also as a primary political block. Can we bring in an ecosystem where the discrete and diverse dispersed health data can be bring into the ecosystem where the data can be exchanged seamlessly to enable the continuum of care irrespective of the patient geography and legal jurisdiction. Though the primary focus is in terms of the international patient movement and moving the health record from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction, but the use case can also be used well fits within the border care. So if we look at Aishman Bharath digital mission, it clearly summarizes the patient, can the patient data move along with the patient? Though there is a concern management and security aspects, but that is the primary aspect behind it. So the use case can also fit in within the border care. This is the primary international patient summary composition. The headers, if you are quite familiar with CDA structure, so it's those are the header. It includes the subject and who is the author and who is the attester. And what is minimum required is the medication summary. It is going to summarize what is the patient medications, and if the patient is allergic or intolerant towards some of the healthcare aspects, and what is the current problem list which is required. But from this context, if we see the immunizations, which is part of the recommended but not a mandatory. But recently, this particular case has become very eminent for the entire world to solve. How do we really get to know the immunization status of a particular member when he's traveling across? So that's where this was a recent initiative where WHO came up with some specification, technical specification and implementation guide to solve this problem. How do we get to know a person who is traveling across the borders, whether he is vaccinated or not? So hence, from that perspective, this particular track is going to sort out such kind of issues. So this IPS composition, what you are seeing, it is still open and it can also evolve and adopt as more people adopt across the borders. Then the main intention of this track is, can we create and exchange the patient summary across different systems? Though from the Connectathon, it's primarily focusing on the India Connectathon, so we cannot keep the systems crossing the jurisdictions. But can we exchange the minimum patient summary data that FHIR bundle across different systems is something which in conformance with implementation guide specification. And also, when there is a jurisdictional transient, the healthcare record is transiting the jurisdictions, cultures, even languages, then there are a lot of challenges in adopting IPS. Not so straightforward unless it's a unified block. So this is where this particular track also links to the terminology track, which is going to deal with such kind of problems. And the main intended audience we are targeting is international patient summary, the profile adopters and implementers, and solution architects, FHIR enthusiasts, and clinical workflow specialists, regulatory specialists, and IT security specialists. The regulatory and IT security specialists which is very much embedded as part of the track, but those aspects we won't be focusing when it comes to this particular event. So the use cases, what we will be focusing is creating and submitting a IPS bundle document from the creator to the consumer, or you can call it as a FHIR server. And whenever someone can he retrieve the IPS bundle from the server and is there a provision to update a particular IPS bundle? So these are the three use case scenarios which we will be covering as part of the track. And though security is a non-negotiable artifact for anyone who want to implement IPS, but for the considering the event and the short time notice, so there won't be any security consideration for the event. So these are the base profiles which international patient summary is going to consider. It includes medication and allergy, intolerance, condition, immunization, diagnostic report, and patient. Though it the bundle also includes the other aspects as well, but these are all the primary profiles which the track is going to make use of. The other related tracks in Aishman Bharath digital mission is something called discharge summary. But the discharge summary is going to confine the record to a particular care of episode. But the patient summary, even if it is not international, the patient summary is a minimum health record, which is geographically agnostic, jurisdictional agnostic, and non-specialized, but still clinically relevant, where it's going to facilitate the healthcare providers to quickly start with the healthcare healthcare of the patient. And terminology services, because when the healthcare record has to move across the patients, move across the jurisdictions, move across the borders, so there are a lot many challenges. So that's where this particular track is also very intrinsically linked to the terminology services. With that, this particular track has not shortlisted considering the number of participants. So I request everyone who is part of this forum to participate, and please do reach out to me or Satyam on the email ID or on the cell phone or even on the Zulip chat or conference webpage. Later, based on the criteria, if the threshold is met and the track is shortlisted, then the detailed scope and how to take it forward to the Connectathon will be shared sometime in next week. With that, handing over to you, Satyam. Thank you.
Thanks for this clarity on IPS track. Satyam has just left. He has to leave for something else. Aditya here. So any other track left? Or I think it was the last track, right?
This was the last track, yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, everyone, for providing this detail about all the tracks. And I think last 2 days gives a pretty clear idea what is going to happen in each track to the entire community. So now people can even decide further. Please fill up the pre-connectathon survey. And now we are actually officially going into pre-connectathon month, and each track lead will have to take care of their internal activities. Let's engage community. Let's go through our plan. And I would also request to update the entire plan on the conference as well, so that people will know that what activities at what date we are planning under each track. Recordings, yes, recording will be there. I think Arun has shared the recording link in the group, in the WhatsApp group. So we will share it once again. And all the track leads, I mean, with the presentations you have prepared, please do share it with Satyam. We will collate everything and then we'll send it to all the participants. And recording also, once available, ready to share, we will share it on the group. So thanks everyone for joining in. Any questions from anyone for anyone?
Okay, so there's a question for people who want to be joined into a WhatsApp group. One of the criteria is that you should have made the payment and registered. Once that is done, typically we try to add you to the WhatsApp group.
The Connectathon WhatsApp group?
Yes, the Connectathon WhatsApp group. Where can I find yesterday's recording session? We will try to create a channel wherein you will have all the pre-connectathon videos that's available.
Yeah, so mostly we will go and upload it on HSL India official YouTube channel. There you can find all of them.
So if there are any other questions, we will try to answer them either through Zulip or through other communication channels. Thank you very much for to all the participants who joined today. Aditya, you can stop the call.
Yeah.